Thank you for joining me today for the inaugural Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation Holocaust Education Center podcast series. I am joined today by Dr. Brian Kahn, a retired teacher at the Urbana school system, as well as a retired education professor from the University of Illinois Springfield. Brian is one of the chairpersons of the Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation's Holocaust Education Center. Thank you for joining me today, Brian.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Since you are the inaugural guest of this podcast series, first, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you became involved with CUJF?
As you mentioned in the intro, I taught at Urbana Middle School for 20-some years, and then I jumped ship to academia, and not sure I made the right decision, but I stayed there for 20 years. So I'm retired 5 years while working in Urbana. Illinois became the first state to mandate teaching the Holocaust. I got involved at school, and then I latched on to a little bit of professional development money and took myself to Washington, D.C. for the summer Belfer Educator Conference. I went 2 times, 2 different summers, and then I started teaching in the classroom. And shortly thereafter, I heard about CUJF and the Holocaust Ed Committee, and Joyce Meyer called me and signed me up. And I still remember meeting with the committee early 90s, probably 92, 93, somewhere in there. And they were just getting the thing off the ground. No internet, no cell phones, different kind of work.
You mentioned the Ed Committee, and of course they existed before you were brought in to work on the CUJF Holocaust Education Center. Can you talk a little bit about the history of the center and how that came to be?
In the late 80s, one of the members of Sinai Temple and CUJF started a committee that looked at Jewish culture in the community and how people here were related to the Holocaust and family members. Joyce Meyer was part of that early group. May she rest in peace. But also the person who came just before her, Robin Gettle, was in on the very beginning of this too. And Mary Lou Brotherson, she started the whole thing. It was not called the Holocaust Ed Committee. It was looking into local Jewish culture. And it was just about the time the mandate in 1990. The Harry Nelson Book Fund was her donation to the community when she retired and left. That group got started, and then by the early 90s, they had actually changed the name to the Holocaust Education Committee. And I think Lee Malhado was the director way back then. After the mandate, it took a few years for that group to get together and start trying to do workshops and deliver professional development.
You mentioned the mandate. Let's talk about that. One of the missions of the center is to serve as a resource to help school systems comply with the Illinois state mandate that came out in 1990 to teach about the Holocaust in 5th, 8th, and 10th grade. Who spearheaded getting this mandate passed?
Jim Thompson decided not to run for re-election. Jim Edgar won the governorship, and it was in Jim Edgar's term that the legislature got this passed through and signed. Illinois became the first state to mandate teaching the Holocaust. The language of the mandate is online. It's not very clear, but actually it does say that teachers shall deliver a unit of study on the atrocities of the Holocaust in elementary and secondary level. It has become traditional over the decades in my work with teachers since the 90s that it most often happens at middle school, usually 8th grade, but it also happens quite a bit at the 5th grade level. Here in Champaign-Urbana, there are a number of teachers who've been teaching this for 20 years now. Valerie Prescott is one at Barksdall. And I know that, you're familiar with her, and Mindy Dyson at Southside. So I've talked in Val's class for over 20 years now about my family. She always has me in as a guest speaker. And sometimes at high school, I have not had a lot of success in hearing back and being able to help high school teachers resource locally. I have within the region. ROEs, the Regional Office of Education, mostly Champaign and Ford and some Vermilion County. That is the mandate. In 2005, the mandate changed. Rod Blagojevich was governor, and the legislature added in, not only will teachers address the Holocaust, they will also do units on comparative genocide, including Armenia, Rwanda, Bosnia-Herzegovina. Superintendents and principals shall provide materials and professional development for teachers to be able to do this. I'm rewording that, but that's pretty much what the mandate says. There is no state curriculum. There was no state curriculum. It was pretty much in those days, learn on your own, try to find the best pedagogical and methodological methods to do this. But we didn't know really how to do it in the 1990s. We hadn't taught it before. Most teachers hadn't taught it before, and so many students had never even studied it. Even students who grew up Jewish, including me, because the Holocaust was not one of those things that was passed down to a lot of children in the 50s and 60s by their parents. Yeah, that's how the mandate got started. Today, there is a statewide commission that Governor Pritzker had set up some years ago. They have a board and they address issues of teaching the Holocaust and genocide in Illinois, but no state curriculum now. We have a number of wonderful curriculums out there, particularly from the Anti-Defamation League and Yad Vashem and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. And it's called Echoes and Reflections. And it's completely online now. And it's filled with primary source documents, first-person narratives. You click on a face and you get a 3-minute story from a survivor. You click on a map and you get questions pop up. And it even gives you methodological concerns in that study. You can do it on your own, or you can take a number of workshops to do it. But it's strictly online now. So now my point is, we don't have to wonder about how to teach the Holocaust. We know best practices now from decades of study and decades of trial. And Echoes and Reflections has changed quite a bit over the last 20 years to include everything that we're focusing on more now in social studies: primary source documents, reading nonfiction text, and also learning to incorporate other forms of writing, poetry, and drama into our teaching of the Holocaust, because that is so much a part of the story.
It sounds like the Illinois State Legislature, it was a bipartisan decision. First Edgar, then Blagojevich. Do you think Illinois has gone far enough in this? And do you know of our surrounding states or other states that have taken it this seriously?
I think it was 2 years ago when Wisconsin finally passed a mandate. I don't believe, and I don't want to misspeak here, less than half of the states have mandated teaching the Holocaust. And I think that when all of this happened in the early 90s and the materials weren't there and the pedagogy wasn't there to do this, things kind of fell by the wayside. The museum opened in Washington, D.C. Schindler's List came out. Books started booming, first-person narratives. More has not been done. We don't have a state curriculum. And the further that we get away from the events of the Holocaust, the more it seems as if it's being lost in the standard shuffle. And there are new Illinois state standards for social studies. Champaign is just now trying to work them into their curriculum. This is a big pilot year for them. We're moving in that direction, but we've been doing it in the region here for over 20 years. And again, mostly self-prepared and self-taught, all the members of the committee.
A lot of us are visual learners, and we need to see physical items in order to absorb the tangible atrocities that have happened. Is there a physical building or a display where people can visit to see pictures and artifacts?
Not locally. CUJF, of course, has an office in the Cohen Center, Jewish Life on campus. Hillel is also in the building. There's no permanent Holocaust exhibit that I know of in this area. The museum in Terre Haute, the Candles Museum, is probably one of the closest. I know that Eva Kur died a few years ago. She was still doing tours to Poland every summer. No, I don't believe there is a place where people can go. If people want to learn more about it, they can contact myself or my colleagues, and all that information is at the CUJF website. And we do have a library. We have a free lending library that they can look at with, of course, printed artifacts. We also have a number of primary source interviews from local families, a project that was done probably 6, 7 years ago by two women at Sinai, Pam Olson and Joyce Francisco. They interviewed people in the Jewish community and wrote and typed up their stories. And those are available for people to read. So we do have those sources available. We just don't have any kind of a permanent display.
Your committee is dedicated to providing assistance to individuals in the area who want to address the universal lessons. Who reaches out to you? Do you hear from teachers or clergy or parents?
Well, originally we reached out to teachers. We had to do the reaching, and it wasn't easy to do the reaching in the 90s with no internet and no email. You wrote letters. Our first couple of years, in fact, the first 3, 4, 5 years, we did mailings once a year of huge package. I spent more time lining them up by zip code at the post office than I did putting them together. And we'd mail them out to a school and we'd hope to hear from somebody. Well, that's all changed. So now we use the ROE, their email service. We announce our events to teachers. We write to superintendents and principals. Mostly we hear from teachers who want to participate in different workshops or who have decided to teach a novel. You often hear comments like, I've never done this before, but I know the students are really interested. How do I do this? How do I even get started? Well, we help teachers do that too. We help them get started. We give them guidelines, and we offer free professional development in the form of workshops. I've even done one-on-one, 1, 2, 3 hour sessions with teachers on how to set up a Holocaust unit. So we do hear from some principals and superintendents because they are accountable too for showing the state that they have addressed this in some capacity. But there's not the same kind of accountability that there is with testing, because we don't test social studies in Illinois at that level anymore. Now it's, well, maybe there's one teacher in the building who approaches it, but how do they do it? What do they use? Are they doing it pedagogically correct, or are they doing things that might cause students to skew their understanding of history, which is a big problem with teaching the Holocaust? We hear from clergy too. We've had some exhibits shown locally at churches. We just finished one at Gibson City Evangelical Lutheran Church, and it was the display. The exhibit was called Courage to Remember at the Vermilion County Museum in Danville. It just had a full month at the American Evangelical Lutheran Church in Gibson City, and over 400 people came to see it. That's one of our exhibits. So yeah, we hear from museums, we hear from libraries, but mostly we hear from teachers. And we're hearing from homeschooling parents who are running their own schools in their smaller communities or mid-sized communities, and they want to teach the Holocaust to their students. So how do we do it?
You send a lot of things to libraries, to classrooms, such as videos, books, newspapers. You give them a lot of resources. How many teachers and classrooms and students would you say that the center or you personally reach each year?
We're starting to do more recently with Mayan, the executive director of CUJF, in terms of keeping numbers and statistics and doing outreach, impact numbers, so that we can better show the impact. I think on the average, I probably get half a dozen teachers a year who want to borrow trunks. They're not really trunks anymore. We found we couldn't carry them, so we had to buy rolling milk crates. And we loaded up with books and films that teachers come and look at and choose. We put that together for them. Aside from that, we reach a lot of teachers via our exhibits, probably hundreds and hundreds of students in the region. A couple of years ago, we had the Auschwitz art exhibit in Danville at the Vermilion County Museum for a month. Over 2,000 people came through the exhibit. And then it went to Danville Area Community College for another 2 weeks. And another 500 or 600 students went through the exhibit. 400 went through in Gibson City. 500 went through when Courage to Remember was at the Elks Lodge last May. So we reach hundreds of teachers in the area, potentially thousands of students. But I think what we don't know is how many people we're reaching, how many students receive this kind of instruction, and what kind of instruction do they receive. I mean, this could be somebody's doctoral dissertation if they wanted to do the research on it, to find out and to interview teachers. So that's one of our challenges, is how do we get more people involved? How do we get more teachers knowing that we're here and that it's all free and we're here to help? We're here to assist. We're not here to tell them what to do, but we have been working at this for decades, and we know a little bit about how to do this. It's not just a matter of content knowledge. That's a very important thing for me to say, I think, coming from a teacher educator background and training middle school teachers for 20 years. It's not just about your content. Yes, you want to love your content. Math teachers love math, science teachers love science, but can you possibly know everything about an event like the Holocaust? Can you possibly know everything about when you're an American history teacher? So yes, the content is important, but it's out there for you to get. And we have many resources that will show you that content, but teachers have to engage and immerse themselves in that content. For many, the bigger question is, how do I do it? Where do I start? Do I show the kids horrific images, or is that a bad thing? Do we read about young teenagers? That's a good thing. There's even picture books trying to explain the horrors of the Holocaust in a more gentle way to third and fourth grade students.
Can you describe when you start talking about it to third, fourth, and fifth graders? What is the look on their face? How do they react?
I've spoken to fifth grade classes. I've not instructed them in a unit, but I have worked with teachers for over 20 years who have done that and who continue to do it. You never expose students to horrific images. It's not necessary. In fact, it's counterproductive. But what is more focused on are issues of prejudice and discrimination and propaganda and how it can change people's minds and whether it's true or it's not true. Just issues of hate. And of course, bullying comes into this too. So that's more of a gentle way to break that. I remember one of the first books that I saw that came out in the late 80s was called The Number on My Grandfather's Arm by David Adler. And he has a number of Holocaust books out there. Hiding from the Nazis is another one. But this book used photographs of a grandfather, a mother, and a granddaughter. And I'm just guessing it was out of Chicago. The story was that the grandfather came over to watch his daughter one night because the parents were going out for dinner. He rolled up his sleeves to do the dishes, and the granddaughter saw the number tattooed on his forearm. Then the mother says, "You know, Dad, it's time that you started sharing some of this because she's curious. She wants to know." And he told his story in the book with photographs from his village, what it was like back then, what it was like when things changed, when Hitler came to power, and how people were angry and shouted bad things and hurt people and imprisoned people. And then at the end, the girl sympathizes with her grandfather, telling him that he's not at fault for all this. It's the other people who did this to him. And there's some sense of relief at the end because then they get up and they go finish the dishes. So you get the sense that the little girl learned something from a grandparent, probably a lesson that she'll never be able to repeat anywhere else. So the local teachers, they do a lot of literature circles. There are a number of books for young adolescents, fiction, and not just Number of the Stars and Devil's Arithmetic. Those are classics, but even new Anne Frank graphic novels, which, by the way, has been banned in a Texas school district as pornography. And there are many others, picture books that are out there, and nonfiction as well. I Never Saw Another Butterfly is a wonderful collection of poems. That's about the children of Terezin concentration camp, the camp that was established to fool the Red Cross when they came in to see how the Germans were treating refugees. And they had an orchestra and they gardened and they had art class. But 15,000 children went through there, and most of them ended up at Auschwitz, dying.
How did this happen has to be one of the most common questions from kids and adults. What are some of the other questions that you get from teachers, from kids, from people that are just learning about the atrocities of the Holocaust?
Why the Jews? What was it about the Jews that Hitler didn't like? I mean, these are not questions I ask. People ask me these questions, and that's a big one. How do you explain thousands of years of anti-Semitism to people who are not familiar with the Jewish faith and Jewish history? To let students believe that Hitler created anti-Semitism is skewing history. He did not. He simply jumped on the bandwagon with the eugenics movement, pseudo race science, trying to put Darwin's theory to practice in the human species, that one group is better than another group biologically by blood. That's one of the big things that you hear. Another is, why didn't the Jews fight back? Well, you got to counter that and say, yes, they did. There are many forms of resistance. And then you talk about physical resistance, armed resistance, and spiritual resistance. People continued to teach their children Hebrew in the ghettos and Yiddish. They continued to educate their children, even though when it was illegal to. In the camps, people even tried to honor the holidays in some small way. Some people were artists and they drew. Some people wrote. There were women who collected recipes that were found after the war in a way that they could help themselves get through difficult times by sharing stories about food. Quite ironic. In Memory's Kitchen was a collection of recipes that women exchanged in a concentration camp found by a long-lost niece in a trunk somewhere in New York. There was resistance. They have to understand the history of anti-Semitism. They have to understand about resistance. And then I think one of the other big questions, and I'll leave it at that, is that why didn't more people help? Why didn't the United States do something? And I'll be careful here because, like the rest of the world, we didn't want to get involved. We didn't want to get in Hitler's way. The last thing FDR wanted was a war in Europe. After Poland fell, after Czechoslovakia fell, after France fell, and the British were there fighting almost by themselves, and things were bad. The United States finally agreed to come in the last years of the war. Why didn't they do more here? Because for a large part, the government did not want to bring more Jewish refugees into the country. There were many Jewish groups in the United States who did not want to bring more refugees into the country. They believed it would make anti-Semitism even worse than it already was here. And I can tell you story after story, including the story of the New York Times that buried stories deep in the paper about refugees and what was going on in Europe. They didn't call them Jews. They called them refugees. This is with a Jewish editor and a Jewish-run newspaper. These stories were buried, and some at the request of major American rabbis who said calling more attention to this is going to increase the amount of anti-Semitism. And the Roosevelt administration believed that they had enough problems here, and then we were fighting the Japanese in the Pacific. Most countries closed their doors to Jewish refugees around the world. And that's why it was so difficult to get out after 1940, 1941.
Anti-Semitism is not new, as you mentioned, but there seems to be a recent surge here in the U.S. Why is this happening now? And talk about your work with CUJF Holocaust Education Center. What are you doing to combat the recent peak in anti-Semitism?
What we're doing to combat it is continuing to offer our services, continuing to let teachers and the public, parents and students know about anti-Semitism, what it is, how to report it if you see an act, the organizations that are important in combating this, such as the Anti-Defamation League, which is at the forefront of combating anti-Semitism. And by continuing to do our work in helping educators become more knowledgeable about the main points of this subject and why they're so important, why you can't teach a unit on the Holocaust and leave out the issue of the history of anti-Semitism. You can't. And that's a very difficult thing for teachers to do. And that's another question I've heard. I'm not Jewish. How do I teach this thing? I want to respond, well, I am Jewish, and I've been trying to teach it for over 20 years, and It's very difficult to explain and for people to grasp this long hatred. Why it's happening, I could only venture some ideas, as could anybody. Issues with Israel and issues with the media, issues with just hate, not just bullying, but hate, which seems to be permeating our society. People lashing out at other people attacking other people because of their race and their color. And the surge in anti-Semitism is worldwide. It's not just here. The ADL did a major study just a few years ago showing the percentages of people who don't know anything about it or who have not been involved with learning anything about it. Not that that's an accurate measure of anybody's knowledge, but this survey really indicates patterns. Not that it's back, but that it's never gone away. It's always gone into remission, so to speak, or hiding, and it always pops out at some point. We can all turn back to the 2016 election and remember a lot of information that was coming out on the internet by a particular candidate that used anti-Jewish tropes against Hillary Clinton, or just anti-Jewish tropes for American Jews who don't support Trump's role in Israel moving the capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Those tropes are still around. They've been around forever, whether it's racial characteristics or biological or blood libel issues dating all the way back to medieval times, or even economic issues, Jews trying to take over the world, which was one of Hitler's arguments and one of the postulates of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a very famous book that came out in the 19-teens, which was completely bogus, but blamed the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I and then stabbing them in the back at the Treaty of Versailles. Even though 100,000 Jews served in the German army in World War I, and I believe 10,000 of them were officers and were either killed or wounded. Why it's back? Partly it's due to social media, it's due to the internet, it's due to a surge in hate and distrust all over the world. We're not the only country that is dealing with chaos and distrust right now as we watch our own news from Washington, D.C. There's ethnic cleansing that continues to go on in the world today. And even though we have long ago said, never forget, never let it happen again, it has happened again, not to Jews necessarily, but to many other peoples. And it's continuing to happen today.
If somebody wanted to get more information about CUJF's Holocaust Education Center, who should they call? Where should they look?
We are in the process of rebuilding our website. If people want to go to CUJF.org, they will find a rebuilt website for the major organization. Under services, they can find Holocaust services. We are in the process of putting newer and we think more informational items on the website. But there is right now a section on the website under Holocaust Library, which has a whole tab on anti-Semitism. To explain it, there's probably 10 articles that are listed there, how to report an anti-Semitic activity. Also under the Holocaust Education Center is a brochure that tells you about how to borrow materials from us, how to call us if you'd like a speaker in your classroom, what kinds of professional development can we offer you as a teacher or a school or a district? What are the books that we have to offer? We have a brand new listing of our materials that's about to go up on our website, which lists over 400 titles, books from all grade levels and films. You can go to the website. You're going to find probably a number of different names. You'll see mine, Brian Kahn. You'll also see the name Bob Lehman or Robert Lehman as a co-chair. And you may also see the name Rebecca Lawson as a co-chair. But mine usually is listed first because I agreed to serve as chair probably for the longest period that we've had a chair. So my name was on a lot of stuff. And my email is there and my phone number is there, my cell number. So people are welcome to call, they're welcome to email, and I get requests every day. It's out there, it's on the web. Please call. We'll do everything that we can to help. We have exhibits that your school can borrow or your church can borrow. We have 2 ongoing exhibits, Courage to Remember, which is a 40-panel chronological tour of the Holocaust created by the Simon Wiesenthal Center, And we also have the Auschwitz Experience in the Art of Prisoners, which is a 22-panel exhibit highlighting art that was created by prisoners in Auschwitz. That's an intense exhibit. Both of them are. But the one with the artistic images has proven to be quite intense for audiences and probably not recommended for children under middle school age. But we have those exhibits that people can borrow for free. I've even budgeted money for transportation. I rented a cargo van the other day and schlepped 42, probably 500 pounds of panels over to Danville from Gibson City to set up the exhibits. And we have money for professional development. Teachers want to contact us. They have a grad class they want to take online. They want to go to a Holocaust conference. We can help pay their way. So those are just some of the services that we offer. And you can find that information on our website, and it will be continually being updated.
Dr. Brian Kahn with the Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation's Holocaust Education Center. This community is so lucky to have you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This is so important. I'm so glad Robin came up with this idea. I challenged everybody to come up with something that they wanted to do to further the impact of the HEC, and Robin thought about podcasts, something that we had never thought about. And we're so grateful to you for managing this delicate task.
It's an honor, and thank you very much. Good luck with your endeavors.
Thank you.